Good morning, everyone, at least for those of you here in the US where I am based, and good afternoon or good evening to the rest of you in other parts of the world. My name is Talon Rindels, and I'm a senior admissions consultant at the MBAExchange. This is our first time presenting with the GMAT Club, so for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a full-service admissions consulting firm that's focused on the graduate level primarily. So everything from MBAs, MPPs, MPAs, dual degrees, we really do it all. And we've been around for a long time, 3 decades actually. We do everything from test prep to mock interviews to waitlist management, you name it. We're your person as it comes to admissions prep. So as an admissions consultant, our firm has talked to thousands of candidates over the years. And the number one thing that we hear from folks is, I need help with my story. And so if you're asking yourself things like, I'm sitting here in front of a blank screen, I have no idea what to write about. Or maybe you're someone who says, I've done so much in my last 25 to 30 years. How on earth am I going to prioritize these things to put it in, the 500-word essay that I have or whatever that might be? Or maybe you're someone who's pretty far along and you've already written your essays, but you're stuck. You're saying, man, I'm still sitting here at 2 times the word limit. How on earth am I going to get this thing down? So if any of those things are you are in the right spot. Today, we are going to talk about what is your story? How can we really unpack this critical ingredient in your admission success? So now I'm going to present my screen real quick here. And in a moment, I will also ask a little bit of you. I want to learn a little bit about you too. So just give me a moment here. Technology is not always my strength. Let me know when okay, I believe you can see my screen now. So with that, let me just spend a quick moment talking about what's on tap for the next hour. So we are going to talk about what your story is and why it really matters, especially to AdCom. We're going to talk about what makes a good story and what might make a not so good or not so compelling story for AdCom. And then we're also going to talk a bit about how to find your story. And if we have folks in the room here today or in the virtual room who have round 2 on their mind, 6 or 7 weeks away from most of those deadlines, we can still even help you. So what I'd love to hear is, where are all of you at in your journey? So if you could just use the chat box a little bit and type in maybe where your geography is, so where you're located, where you're at in your admissions journey. So whether you've got round 2 on your mind, maybe you even still have some interviews left from round 1 and you were working to kind of perfect that story for those interviews. Or maybe you're an early bird. You're thinking round 3 or even next year, applying next year or beyond. Please let me know, where are you at in your journey? So just feel free to type in the chat box there. Now, while you are doing that, I will also just share a little bit more about myself. So I have my MBA from Kellogg School of Management, graduating in 2013. So I think I'm aging myself a little bit here. I've served as an alumni interviewer for Kellogg, and I'm also currently a student advisor. So I help folks who are considering joining the CPG industry or retail industry really craft their stories and figure out how it is that they get there, or even more importantly, is it really for them? So I help current students at Kellogg with that. So that's kind of academic Talon, but then there's also corporate Talon. So corporate Talon has worked in CPG and retail over the last 15 years across companies like Target, Conagra Brands, Mars Incorporated, and also General Mills. So what I like to say, because I'm a little bit non-traditional in that I haven't actually picked a specialization yet, what I've been doing over the years is working to develop my general management toolkit. So I've worked across finance, mergers and acquisitions, global business development, where I helped to build a 700-person office in Mumbai, India. I've also worked in merchandising within retail. I've worked in marketing and also in sales. So one key theme really comes through with corporate Talon and also academic Talon, and that is storytelling. I love hearing people's stories. I love helping them to tell their stories. I love telling stories myself. In corporate Talon, what I do is I help to tell consumer stories, often leveraging data. Academic Talon or admissions consultant Talon helps other people to unpack and tell their stories in a way that is compelling to others. And that's really why I'm here today. I'm also really passionate about inclusion in the workforce and equity. And so I serve as an ambassador for the Network of Executive Women. In my free time, running is my passion. So I'm a marathon runner. I'm a triathlete. I was part of the founding crew of the triathlon club at Kellogg, which is still up and running today. So that's a little bit about me. Now let me just take a look at the chat box and see what I've learned a bit about you. Round 1, 2 colleges. We've got 3 schools for round 2, preparing for GMAT. All right, we've got some early birds here as well. Okay, we've got folks located in India, Germany. All right, we have people from all across the world. I've been to all those places. One thing that's not on this list here is how much I love to travel. So feel free to let me know some of the great travel destinations that you've been to as well. Thank you for sharing a bit about yourselves. All right, so let's first start with what your story is not. I think that anytime that you're learning something new, it's helpful to kind of ground yourself on what something isn't. So here you can see, 3 things related to John Doe. You can see his resume. We can see his high school transcript. Also see his GMAT report. It's interesting, sure, right? But imagine trying to assess what it would be like to work with John Doe after only seeing these 3 things. We know what he's done, but we really don't know why he's done those things or who he is as a person or as a colleague. And so why does that really matter? It's because, we invest in people. We invest in people that we care about more specifically. And that's why we care what's behind all of this. Imagine if we took John Doe's resume here and we cut it off 3/4 of the way through. We'd still know a little bit about what he's done, right? We probably wouldn't really care all that much. But imagine that you're reading a story or a book, and all of a sudden it just ends 3/4 of the way through. You'd be yearning for more. And that's exactly what we are trying to do in an admissions campaign. Share just enough that AdCom is intrigued and wants to learn even more. And how they learn more about you? It's through that interview. So that's how you get that interview invite, is you share enough that gets them intrigued, and then they invite you to that interview to really round out that story. And then even better, they invite you to join their program so that they can really see how that story ends and unfolds. So absolutely, these 3 things are important, but they are not your story. So what actually is your story? It's a narrative, first and foremost. So we're talking sentences and paragraphs, and that's how a story really unfolds. It's who you are. It's what you care about. What is your underlying passion? It's where you've been. This could be geographically. This could be where you work. This could be where you grew up. What you really want to do and when you want to do that. So that's that when piece of this story, is your short-term goal and then your long-term goal as well, and how those 2 things are really related. And of course, I just said how, but how an MBA fits into that. That is a critical component, because who, what, where you've been, and where you want to go is important. But sometimes you can actually do that without an MBA, or AdCom may think you can. So you've got to explain and connect the dots in terms of why that MBA is really necessary for you to achieve that goal. When you listen to someone tell their story, you learn a lot about what details they really focus on. You learn about the choices that they made, what kind of what interrupted one thing and led someone to try something else. what was important to them during that time, what was running through their mind, what did they learn? And, you really gain some insights into what their motivations are for everything that they've done and where they want to go. And that's why all of these contents are important. Your story is authentically you, and it's irreplicable by others. So all of the folks that we have here on the line today, you each have a unique story. No two of you has an identical story. Just think about that. Of the hundreds of people who are on this call today and those who will listen thereafter, every single one of you has something different to say. And that's really, really important. So your story does not have to include overcoming adversity or changing the world. So maybe you didn't grow up living on, a household income of $10 a day. Maybe you didn't grow up, in an orphanage or something like that, some sort of adversity that you had to overcome. Maybe you didn't develop a plan to solve world hunger, as an example, right? But that's okay. You still have a very unique and important story to tell. Just take myself as an example. When I applied to business school, I had no idea until I, found some key coaches and mentors who helped me. I had no idea that the fact that I was a first generation undergrad and the only in my family to apply for a graduate degree was important. Had no idea. But after the right introspection and planning, I really learned what all of that did to me and how it really shaped who I am and what I wanted to become. I also had no idea that it was important that I grew up with a father who started his own business that he ran out of the basement of our home. He was a taxidermist, so he mounted animals for a living out of the basement of our home. I grew up playing with, deer brains and fish eyes. Excuse me if anybody's eating or if I grossed anybody out there. To me, that was super normal. And I had no idea that to other people that was interesting and actually said something about me as a person and how that shaped what I wanted to become. So the where you want to go does not actually have to happen. So believe it or not, what you write in there as your long-term and even your short-term goal may not come to fruition. And AdCom knows that. So many candidates get so hung up on, I don't know what I want to do. How do I know that I can actually do X, Y, and Z? And that serves as a real barrier for them when they're actually trying to write their essays and share their story. It's really quite backwards when you think about it. In your MBA essays, you tend to write, what your long-term goals are and all of these things. But at the end of the day, there are so many people who are going back to get their MBA to figure that all out, right? AdCom knows that. But it's important that you've done the right introspection and planning to be self-aware enough to arrive on campus with a plan. Because there's so much going on in an MBA program that folks get FOMO a lot, fear of missing out, right? Then they get involved in way too much. They have too many irons in the fire, and they're just completely overwhelmed. And then it becomes a really unproductive experience. AdCom wants to know that you have done enough upfront introspection to arrive on campus with a plan to be deliberate and intentional with your time. Because if you're deliberate and intentional with your time at your MBA, then they have the impact, they have the confidence that you are going to make an impact on the program while you're there, and you are going to leave with a job. That's exactly what everybody wants, right? They want to leave with a job and do really great things thereafter. So if you can create a compelling story throughout your admissions campaign that's very crystal clear on where you want to go and why, that will give AdCom the confidence that you're going to be productive while you're on campus and that you are actually going to be successful thereafter. Demonstrating that self-awareness is absolutely critical. So your story holds regardless of what the questions actually are in an interview or on the essays. So in an interview, when somebody says, hey, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume, they're really asking the exact same thing. When you're looking at the HBS essay set and it says, hey, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? Or you're looking at Stanford's essay set, 2 questions. What matters most to you and why? And why Stanford? Or maybe it's Fuqua's 25 random things, or it's Kellogg's focus on value, where they say, hey, when have you created value and what challenges have you faced? And what values are most important to you? All of these questions are fundamentally asking you for your story. But what's most important is I'm not telling you that you should copy and paste your story regardless of what the questions are. Yes, you have to tailor it to the school. You have to tailor it to the specific questions being asked, but your fundamental story should not change. Who you are, where you want to go, that stuff should all remain intact because you've done enough introspection. You are self-aware enough to be confident in that story. You're just going to need to tell it in a slightly different way depending on the school. You know, a school like Harvard or Stanford, you might want to focus a little bit more on your leadership. A school like Wharton or Kellogg, you're going to want to make sure that you really hone in on how you've demonstrated teamwork throughout your career. And then maybe a school like MIT, you know, how has, you know, that analytical mindset come through? So sure, you're going to focus on slightly different things or put an emphasis on slightly different things. But at the end of the day, your story holds true, but we're absolutely not going to copy and paste. Okay. So now let's get into, you know, what does good really look like? We talked a little bit about, you know, what it doesn't look like, right? So I've mentioned the contents, right? The who you are, the what you care about, where you've been, where you want to go and when, and then how an MBA fits into that. But how you deliver those contents, the feel, as I like to call it, is really, really important as well. I would say it's equally important. So that's kind of the what is the contents, and the how you deliver it is the feel. Now, when it comes to the feel, what you want to make sure you do is you have a logical connection between each piece of your story. Your story should have a rhythm or a flow to it, and how you got from point A to point B should be logical. I really kind of think about this as a geometry proof. You know, if A, then B, if B, then C, so that each piece of your story is really linked. Fortunately for me, geometry was my favorite class in primary school, which is probably no surprise that now storytelling is one of my favorite things in my career because I really see those things clearly linked. Now, it needs to be memorable. It needs to be, and, you know, memorable can come in different forms. It can be unique, it can be vivid, it can be emotional. You know, really digging deep into your childhood can often get at that emotion of what's, you know, the driving force for your long-term goal or what you're fundamentally passionate about. One little example for me is, as a child, I wanted to own a pet store. And the reason that I wanted to own a pet store was to, you know, really help all of the dogs and cats out there who needed homes. You know, they needed loving homes to be a part of. And where that really came from was when I was a 5-year-old little girl, my neighbor got the cutest little husky puppy. But unfortunately, when winter came around, that husky puppy sat outside on a leash all winter long. And I live in Minnesota. So let me tell you, it gets cold up here. And that poor little puppy sat outside all day and even into the night. And its little toes were getting stuck to the ice outside. And I just heard it barking all day long. So at dinner, I would save half of my dinner every single night. And I would bring it over to that cute little husky puppy that had little tears in its eyes when I went over there, to bring it just a little bit of joy with my dinner. And, you know, I would sit and pet it and, you know, actually brought a little bit of joy to that puppy's life. That is fundamentally what drove my desire to own a pet store as a child. Now, of course, that's not what I wrote about, in my MBA application. Funny thing is I actually work in the pet care industry now. So my childhood dreams are somewhat coming to fruition here. But I share that story because when I shared it, I talked about how cold it was. I talked about, you probably got an image in your mind of this little puppy with its paws frozen to the ground, right? I created an image in your mind. It's that type of thing that we are looking to do with the stories that you share in your MBA application. Now, specific and conviction. These things are really important. You want to be very, very confident in your story and confident in your long-term and short-term goals. And you want to be specific, not only in sharing, the vivid details of the stories like that husky puppy, but you also want to be specific in your goals. Share the specific company that you'd like to work for, or the specific role that you'd like to have. And you also need to showcase humility and growth. So maybe those things seem counter to one another. You need to be confident, but then also be humble and showcase humility. But they really do work together. So you need to showcase times in your life that you stumbled and times that, you were able to really develop. You also want to showcase that you have other areas to continue to develop. Otherwise, if you had everything figured out, you wouldn't need an MBA, right? So showcasing humility and growth is a really important part of your story as well. Okay, so now we are going to work through a little case study, an example. So while you're looking at this, so first of all, Brenda's credentials. Let's talk about that. So this is kind of that what, right? She has a psychology degree from University of Texas, Austin. She has a 3.8 GPA from that degree. She has a 710 GMAT score. She spent 5 years in finance across the consumer products industry. She currently lives in Chicago, Illinois, and her dream is Harvard Business School. Let's just pretend, we know this isn't true, but let's just pretend she's got 200 words to work with right now for her story. And we're going to focus on how she can really maximize those 200 words. All right, so let's take a look at, all right, 1 like for Talon's insightful presentation. Thank you, guys. All right, so let's take a look at what Brenda wrote down, at least her starting point. So Brenda says, and while I'm reading this, by the way, please start thinking about what she's doing well, and even more importantly, what she's not doing well. So a little pop quiz is coming for you after this. And think both about that what and the how. So those are the credential or the who, what, when, where, why, how, right? And then also the feel that you get, right? So how is she really delivering it? So Brenda says, I desire every family to have ready access to food to eat and clothes to wear. Growing up in a small rural community, we had to drive an hour to find a grocery store, and it was a real strain on my single working mother. At the same time, there's a landfill near my childhood home that grew 10 times in the last 2 years. And then she goes on and says, today, e-commerce improves the lives of people like my mother every single day. I know it is the future, and we must find a way to make it more environmentally friendly. Long term, I hope to be at the forefront of that by becoming a leader in the retail sector. In order to gain the broad strategic perspective I'll need to make smart, sustainable decisions, post-MBA, I aspire to become an associate at a large management consulting firm. Okay, so let's first focus on the contents. Any ideas on what Brenda is missing from her story? Go ahead and feel free to type it in the chat box. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give it away. So Brenda's done a great job of, with the limited word count that she has to work with, who she is and what she cares about. So let's focus on that first paragraph for a second. She says that, she grew up in a small rural community. She's a single working mother. This is a lot about who she is, It talks a bit about, this tells me that she had a great role model growing up. She had a mother who was working extremely hard to put food on her table. And, that wasn't easy, it sounds like. And she may not have had, great access to things growing up in this small rural community, far away from a lot of things. The what she cares about, this one jumps off the page for me. I mean, she desires every family to have ready access to food to eat and clothes to wear, and that we must find a way to make e-commerce more environmentally friendly. She talks about the when, right? She mentions both her short-term and long-term goal, which is great. You see that in green there. But we haven't really learned, where she's been, what her journey really looked like, and how an MBA fits into that. Brenda's winning elections is what Baton says. I like that. Okay. Now let's move on to the feel. So I'll talk about how to fix those things in just a moment. But let's talk about the feel. So what has Brenda done well, and where is she kind of missing the mark? Go ahead and feel free to use the chat box as well. But I will give away the answers now. So this is where Brenda's falling quite a bit short on how she's delivering her story. So when you take a look, at the logical connection, is it flowing? If A, then B causality, is that happening? Yeah, I would say for the most part it is, right? She starts out by saying that she desires every family to have ready access to food. She says that was a real strain on her mom, so connects that to her childhood. Then she says that e-commerce improves the lives of people like her mom. And, she really needs that broad strategic perspective to make smart, sustainable decisions, to really improve that. So to me, she's got the logical connection there. It's memorable. I mean, it could be more memorable, right? I mean, she could describe, she says that she grew up in a small rural community, had a long drive in the car with her mom to get to the grocery store. I'm picturing this landfill near her home. She could have talked maybe about the smells that, this landfill gave off, or what type of road. Maybe she, had to drive on a gravel road and it was bumpy, or maybe the grocery store had a certain smell to it, right? She could share things like that, but we're only working with 200 words here. So I'd say she did all right with making it memorable. But it's certainly not specific. What is a leader in the retail sector, right? I mean, I don't know. Could be any function, right? It could be any role, and it could be any company. She didn't share, what management consulting firm she wants to work with, just vaguely a management consulting firm. So she could do better there. Conviction. So she says, I hope and I aspire rather than I will or I intend. Using those more definite words will really display conviction, which she has not really done here. And she hasn't really shared more about her story in terms of, where she grew, where she stumbled, or where she wants, what she really needs to develop and grow to achieve those long-term and short-term goals. All right. Oh, jumping to e-commerce was kind of abrupt. Nice one, Baton. So actually, we will get there, right? I said we had some logical connection, but you are absolutely right. We were missing that connection. And you know what? We cover it on the next slide. So kudos to you. A+ so far. You're really paying attention. So before I get then to the second paragraph on how we fix the specificity and conviction, I did think that it was important to add another short phrase in there to that first paragraph to make sure we could tell that connection from the landfill to e-commerce, right? That landfill was filled with packaging materials, from e-commerce. And so that's why we need to make e-commerce more sustainable. So thank you so much for calling that out, Baton. And please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. I've battled with that my entire life. My name being Talon, but spelled exactly like Talon. So I feel your pain if I am pronouncing it incorrectly, and I apologize if that's the case. All right. And so now moving on. Now, here's how we can really quickly and easily fix the specificity and conviction. So we say, hey, I want to be the head of e-commerce for a large retailer such as Walmart. If I read that, I say, wow, this person, Brenda, is going to arrive on campus with a plan, right? She's already got a target list of companies she wants to work for one day. And then her short-term goal too, which is, I guess, who she's actually going to be targeting when she's at school. She says, hey, my dream is to work for BCG. So she's got a plan, and she's going to be deliberate in that plan when she arrives on campus. She also says it with conviction now. She says, my long-term goal is to become, that's a definite statement. It's not saying maybe. And she also says, I intend to become an associate, not I hope or I aspire, right? She's saying it with conviction. What we still haven't done, though, is really tackle that humility and growth. So we'll get there in just a second. And now there's a question from Baton on, do we need to be exact and specific on what we think or visualize ourselves to be in the future? Absolutely. As specific as you can get makes your goal that much more authentic and believable. And again, what AdCom is most concerned with is they want to know that when you arrive on campus, you have a plan. So as specific as you can get, the more believable that story really is, or that long-term goal is. And so I do highly recommend that, you say, hey, this is the company that I want to work for. And you can do it in a little bit of general terms, in terms of, I want to work as the head of e-commerce for a large retailer such as Walmart, right? Not saying that is the only retailer you will work for, because we don't want to also, pigeonhole you, right? Because what if that doesn't happen? Then do you have a plan B, right? That can be really, really important to AdCom as well when they're thinking about your ability to land a job post-graduation and ultimately, succeed long-term. So you don't want to entirely pigeonhole yourself to just one thing. Okay. So now let's see how we fix that humility and growth. So Brenda goes ahead and adds one more paragraph. She says, while I've gained some great analytical skills in my 5 years in CPG, as a liberal arts major, I know an MBA from HBS is critical to rounding out my finance experience with the more holistic general management perspective that I need. Okay. And so if you ask me, this begins to showcase humility and growth. Yes, she could probably do it a little bit better, but here she does say, hey, in my 5 years across consumer products, I've gained great analytical skills. I really grew as a person. And, I know, though, that there's more growth yet to be done for me. I know that this MBA from HBS is crucial to rounding out that finance experience with that more holistic general management experience. So now I know what she wants to do when she arrives on campus. She also uses conviction in saying it, right? She's not saying that HBS is one school that could do it, right? She knows that. She says, I know an MBA from HBS is critical, right, to rounding out, and achieving her goals, right? And so she says that with conviction, not just, it could be HBS, could be another school. When I read this says HBS is the school that can help me to achieve my dreams better than any other. Okay, so how did this paragraph do, going all the way back to the contents, where we still had two gaps, the where she has been and then how an MBA fits into that? Let's see if that paragraph also accomplished that. If you ask me, it mostly does. Again, sure, I wish we learned a little bit more about where Brenda's been, but at least it's, it says, hey, I've been in CPG, I've been in finance, I've gained some great experience. So that's a little bit more of the where she's been. And then how an MBA fits into that. I mean, that one's clear, right? We just kind of talked about that one. So now she's really solved that gap as well. So, all right, I hope we've got some astute folks on the line that have been thinking. We've talked about who, what, where, when, and how. But there's another really important piece of this puzzle, right? Which is why. How have we forgotten about the why, right? We haven't forgotten about the why. The why AdCom should pick you is absolutely critical. But I've intentionally actually left this off until now, because if you ask me, we absolutely should not tell AdCom the why. So I have first drafts of essays that I review all the time say things like, AdCom, you should admit me into your program because I will work harder than anyone. I have the grit, I have the tenacity, and I have the dedication to excel. Now, you may think this sounds like a great statement, right? It's confident, it has conviction. But if you ask me, you shouldn't have to tell AdCom this. You absolutely shouldn't have to tell them that you have the grit, the tenacity, and the dedication. Your story and the experiences that you share should showcase that alone. You shouldn't have to overtly say it. And so a really, really good story will tell AdCom why they should admit you without telling them that, right? So it's more about showing AdCom these things through your story rather than overtly communicating it. Now, we only had 200 words, right, for Brenda. I don't know if it's crystal clear there, right? I mean, we did talk a little bit about maybe growing up, with less access to things than some people, right? I mean, she could probably have done it a little bit better, but she probably shared just enough that AdCom is interested in learning a bit more. And then she can share a little bit more. She can show AdCom a little bit more about why they should admit her through her stories in her interview. Or we all know she, throughout the entire admissions campaign, has more than 200 words, right? There's probably another essay in there where she could showcase that. She could also leverage her letters of recommendation, to showcase that as well. If her recommender believes that, those things are true, her recommender could help to say that as well. Okay, so let's summarize a bit about what we learned. This could kind of be your takeaway. Maybe, take a screenshot here. Also, this is recorded, so you can always come back and watch it as well. And so I won't, belabor the point here, but ultimately, I just want to make sure that what you leave here today with is knowing that the what you share in your story is as important as, or I guess the how you share your story is as important as the what that you share. So that feel is extremely, extremely important. And then you notice that in the contents, I've added that why AdCom should pick you in gray there, because ideally it comes through your story, but you are not overtly selling yourself to AdCom directly by saying, pick me because of X, Y, and Z. So go ahead and take a screenshot if you'd like. All right. So what you guys are all probably wondering though is, okay, great tips, whatever, but how on earth do I find my story? So in an ideal world, and I know we've got a lot of round 2 folks on here, so don't panic, but in an ideal world, those of you who still have the time, ideally you find and shape that story before you even open up the application. Going back to earlier, I said, the questions don't really matter. Your story is fundamentally what it is, right? Regardless of the questions that are asked. And so that's why it's important, or it can be helpful, to do that introspection and storytelling before you even open up the application. Those of you in round 2, though, I hope you've opened up the application because we've got 6 or 7 weeks to go. So hopefully you have. And don't panic then if you've already opened it and you still haven't figured out your story. That's okay. We're going to talk about what those of you who have round 2 apps coming, or those of you who are early birds for next year, can do in the coming weeks, months, years, however long you have. So there are 3 key things that I would really recommend that you focus your energy on. First and foremost is get a handle on what you've done. So if you are, already in the thick of round 2 apps, just pause, set everything aside, take a step back, and just jot down, all of the involvement that you've had throughout your life, the activities that you've been involved in, key experiences that have really shaped you, personally, professionally, while you're at university, and make sure to really segment out, those different things, because otherwise you might get overly focused on your career when what you did in university or what you did when you were 6 years old is really a critical component. So make sure that you try to find activities, from each life stage. And then take a moment and really reflect on why you engaged in those activities and how they're really all connected. What drove you to interrupt one activity and move on to the next? And what was going through your mind during that? What scared you? And, what excited you? And then really identify those times that you thrived and those times that you stumbled. What were some of those career bests that you had that make you proud? What were some of those, extracurriculars and involvement in the community that makes you proud? And where were you really stumbling? Where did you feel uncomfortable? Those pieces are really, really important. Okay, and now the second thing would be get a clear handle on your goal. A lot of candidates struggle with this. And at the end of the day, you got to pick something that you're passionate about and then go with it, right? It's okay AdCom knows that your long-term goal or even your short-term goal may not be what actually happens, but they just want to know that you are self-aware enough to arrive on campus with a plan. So one question that I would suggest if you're still kind of struggling on, what is my goal, is picture yourself at your retirement party. Whether that's when you're 65 or heck, people are retiring now at 40, 50, right? Whenever that retirement party is for you, picture yourself there and say, what would I want noted in that retirement speech? Whether it's someone giving it about you or whether you're giving it yourself or whether there isn't one, right? But if there were one, what would you want to be a part of that? Make that your goal. That is got to be something that you are innately passionate about. And then you don't have to search for that passion. It will just jump off the page. Then I also suggest that you go back to step 1 and you take a look at how those past activities really connect to that goal, because that adds that authenticity to your goal. So if my goal was, to, make sure that every pet in the world had a loving home, right? I would go back to that childhood experience that I had, at age 5, when that little husky puppy was sitting out shivering in the cold, right? I'd go back to that experience. There's probably some other things from my career and my involvement in the community as well that I'd want to tie to that goal. But that really makes it believable to AdCom. Your past is the best indicator of the future, right? How you've acted in the past and the things that you've chosen to get involved in are the best indicator, to add that authenticity to your goal. So really dig deep to figure out what it is that you've done in your past that is connected to that long-term, passion and goal that you really want to achieve. The other day I was talking with a candidate who was having a really hard time explaining the connection between what she's done and her most recent career move. So she had moved into a seed startup that focused on foreign language learning. And she said, I just can't figure out how to draw that connection to why I even took this job. And I said, well, that's interesting because, within only 2 minutes of talking with her, it was so clear to me that education was something that was really, really important to her. What I heard from her is that, she was a leader in Enactus. And as a child, she volunteered at an orphanage to teach math and science. And I said, I've seen this theme of education throughout your entire career. And her, light bulbs just went off in her head. She's like, wow, I hadn't even realized that throughout my whole life, I've been focused on helping others to learn and grow. And that's what drew her to this seed startup, was to help people really expand, their learning agility by learning a new language. And then, of course, that fed right into, her long-term goal in the education sector. But sometimes, just how a person tells a story and the key things that they focus on can be so apparent to someone else. And, the person themselves who's telling it, just can't quite connect those dots because they've been too involved and invested in these things. Okay. And that's what drives me to this third point, is getting the right people in your corner. So I tell every candidate that I talk to how important this is. This is probably one of the most important things. There are 3 key people that you want on your side throughout this admissions campaign. And there can be overlap. Maybe even one person can actually accomplish all 3 of these things. But you need to make sure that you have one person who knows the school and the admissions process. Someone who knows this MBA industry or knows the schools that you're applying to and can make sure that your application is ultimately sharing your story in a way that would resonate with that school. Like I had mentioned, Kellogg and Wharton really care about teamwork. Each school has certain things that they care a little bit more about than others. Someone who knows English grammar. So, obviously, this will help with spell checking and making sure that things are coming, are coherent in the way that you write, but also it can help you to get within those word limits. man, I mean, I remember writing my MBA applications and I was stuck, 3 words, stuck 3 words over, right? And so I had someone help me figure out, which 3 words were not absolutely crucial without changing the story. But, someone who really knows the English grammar can help you, gosh, if you're 10% above, 20% above, whatever that is, with some finessing, it's usually pretty easy actually to keep your authentic voice and keep your main messages, but find a way to say it in a more concise way. So someone who knows English grammar is extremely important. We also want to make sure that you have someone in your corner who knows you, a key family member, a key friend that you've had since childhood, whoever that is. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you provide your entire holistic application to that person so that when they read through it, they say, yes, this is Brenda. This is who I see when I read this. Because especially if you've had someone help you, in other areas who doesn't know this process very well, sometimes, you can take their feedback too seriously. And then all of a sudden you've lost yourself, right? So you have to make sure that you have yourself, that yourself is accurately portrayed in this process. Now, let's just say that you're working with an admissions consultant. If you are, by the end, or I would say the middle of your engagement, really that person can probably check every one of those boxes. So if you're working with an admissions consultant all the way through, that person by the middle or even early on in your engagement, that person should know who you fundamentally are. So they can probably check all those boxes, but even so, I still recommend, somebody with that history with you to at least have, that person in your corner and prepared and ready that, hey, by such and such a date, I'm going to send this to you. And I'm going to really need your support to make sure that when you read this, you see me, Brenda, John Doe, whoever that is. All right. So now we're about ready to move to the Q&A portion. And before I start reading, and actually go ahead and start typing in some questions that you might have for me in the chat box. But before I read those, I have a feeling that what many of you might have on your mind is, but I truly don't have a unique story. And, I don't often like to tell people that they're wrong, but I'm sorry if you're thinking that you are wrong. All of the people that are on this call today and all the people who are going to view it afterward, each and every one of you has a unique story. No two of you have the same story. And that's true for any candidate who has ever applied to business school and will in the future. So I'm sorry if you feel that you don't have a unique story. I respectfully disagree. You just need to find it. And so if you go through those 3 steps that I mentioned on the prior slide and you're still not quite getting it, I highly encourage you to talk to somebody who doesn't actually know you and isn't invested in your stories, whether that be an admissions consultant, whether that be, a coworker at work who you don't know very well. But I promise you, as you tell your story, certain little nuggets are going to shine and jump out at them that maybe you don't even realize are missing. So, things that are completely ordinary to you are extraordinary to others, Things like my dad running a taxidermy business out of the basement of our home. Things like me being a first-generation undergrad, right? I had no idea those things were important, but I had people to help me to see why they were important and how they've shaped me into who I am. And I know you have those things for you as well. And so with that, I would love to jump to Q&A. And of course, if you have further questions after this session, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to hear your story and help you craft your story. You can find us at www.MBAExchange.com. And now let's go to Q&A. So I will stop sharing my screen now. And let's see what's in the chat box. Okay, so we've got Vatan. And again, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please forgive me. Hey, if my goal is to start my own business, how do I explain that? And how much do I explain? What, why, how, and what's your opinion? Oh, I love using my terms. Thank you so much for speaking right to me. So if your goal is to start your own business, that's great. You want to be an entrepreneur. I love hearing that. So how do you explain that, and how much do you explain? Well, the very first question that I have in reading this is why, right? What is your why? What is fundamentally driving you to want to start your business? It's also really important to me, what kind of business? So what I'm hearing from you is it's important, you don't necessarily want to work for somebody else, or maybe you don't think that somebody has created the type of company that will achieve what you want to achieve. And that's why you want to start your own business. So those are the two key things that I initially go to is, well, why do you want to be this entrepreneur? And really, what type of entrepreneur do you want to be? What type of industry? What do you want your company to change? What problem do you want it to fix? To really prove out, that it doesn't exist in the market today, right? So how are you going to really do that differently? Okay, and now we've got Abby saying story could personal struggle. Could be. Thank you. A story could be a personal struggle and leadership, or only at the professional level. Oh, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, because too often candidates feel that their stories have to be all about their professional accomplishments or their professional struggles. And your involvement in the community is as important or more important, or even more important in some cases, than what you've been able to achieve in your career. And so I highly encourage you. And that's why really step one was all about, personally, professionally, and, in college, what are those key activities that you've done? The personal piece for me was meant to also articulate, those extracurricular activities that you're involved in. So maybe you can break that out even into 4, right? Personal, university, professional, and then extracurricular activities. But absolutely, you want to be showcasing leadership not only at work, but while you were in college and in the community. Your community involvement is paramount. And if you're someone who doesn't have any community involvement, on your resume, we have some great tips for how you can, get involved in the community in a way that isn't going to add, hours and hours and hours to your plate. It's going to be something that'll actually strengthen, your long-term goal and add authenticity to it, right? Something that clearly fits into your story. And we can absolutely help you with that. In an ideal world, you'll showcase longevity, so consistent involvement in the same types of things that ultimately build to, some of your aspirations. I have a lot of candidates who come to me and say, I have a lot of involvement in the community, but it's really ad hoc. It's one-off. I volunteered at the Ronald McDonald House one day, and then, every now and then I am involved with my church in X, Y, and Z. And then I do this, here to, with my work. And it seems like just very fragmented involvement that doesn't have a clear theme. But I promise you can probably find a theme, amongst each of those different things that will showcase longevity. Maybe it's, putting some sort of overarching theme to it that, hey, I'm really passionate about helping others learn and grow. And so that's why I was a mentor when I was in college, or a tutor, to folks, other folks at my university. And then maybe it's, then at work, I help read to young children. And to me, that's all learning, right? There's a theme, even if it's different organizations that you've been a part of and, really different activities, there's still an underarching theme. And so, just try to figure out how you can kind of connect those dots to add that consistency and longevity to your involvement. Okay, now let me spend a moment just reading through some of the other ones, some of the other questions that have come through to figure out what to focus on here. Okay, we've got, let's see. Okay, so Dash says, I'm working in a pharmaceutical company in sales, and I have a passion in brand development and product management and development of what would be the best option in my career in a business school. So let's see. So you're currently in pharmaceuticals, you're in sales. That's some great experience. I can imagine you've got some good stories to tell here, Dash. And also product management. And so what would be a good option for you in business school? Man, I think I got to hear a little bit more in order to answer this question. What are you passionate about? What do you like about that job in pharmaceutical sales? What don't you like? What more are you yearning for? I would love, Dash, to just hear you tell your story in your own words. And I feel like I could add more authenticity. If you like that product management, but maybe feel a little bit disconnected to it in sales. Maybe you want to be, more a part of the creation of those products, right? So that could be, some sort of brand management, even, marketing works on product development. So maybe you want to go a little bit earlier in the process, right? So right now you're working kind of on the back end, selling things in, and maybe you want to get, earlier in that value chain. But I'd love to hear more about your story and really help you to unpack that. Let's look at other questions here. Okay, so Amandeep says, should you try to address gaps in your profile in the essay? Very good question. Very good question. Absolutely. So in that upfront, step one that I had recommended, to jot down all of your activities, and then really assess where you thrived, where you stumbled, things like that. I mean, another key thing that you'll probably be doing during that stage is saying, what's missing from here, especially as you work to get to that step 2 of figuring out what your long-term goal is. And then you say, and then through that, you'll say, okay, now how can I connect those activities to my long-term goal? And there might be some gaps, right? You might also be applying to MIT and saying, oh man, my analytical skills, like how do I showcase that? Or, what you're saying here is maybe you don't have extracurriculars, right? So should you address those gaps? Absolutely. And, maybe something like this, you'd actually use that optional essay to say, hey, I know that a fundamental gap in my candidacy is that maybe I wasn't as involved, in university or as involved in the community right now. But here's why. When I was a student, I had to fund my entire education. I came from a family who did not have the resources to do it. We were very financially strapped. So I was working full time on top of, full-time, being a full-time college student. And so I just didn't have the opportunity to take on, those leadership positions while I was at university. Absolutely. Go ahead and address those, whether that be in the optional essay or whether that could be, in another area of your application. But certainly if you know that there are fundamental gaps in your application, yes, they should be addressed. However, I think what would be even better is if there's a way to overcome those before you even submit your application. Or if you really dig deep, maybe there's other things that you were involved in that you're just not even realizing. Maybe it's that, your company volunteers once a quarter at a certain place and, you help out with that too. That is community involvement. Sure, it's with, the backing of your company, but you're absolutely involved in the community, right? So a lot of times people actually have, things that they don't even realize are extracurriculars as a part of their story. So it's, first of all, better to just circumvent those gaps. But certainly if there's a vulnerability that you are not able to address, or not able to kind of fix before you apply, absolutely, let's address it. And there are things like, let's say your GMAT score or GRE score is not where you want it. There's things like MBA math and such, things like that can help to overcome that vulnerability and showcase that you are going to arrive on campus ready to handle that academic rigor. So, if that's someone's vulnerability, absolutely, there are deliberate actions that you can take that you can showcase to AdCom, through your admissions campaign. All right, and we are almost at time, but I'm going to go ahead and take one more question. And then, of course, if you have additional questions afterward, you can find us at www.MBAExchange.com. I love stories. I love hearing people's stories. So I would love to hear yours and help you unpack yours. But let's read one more question. All right, so So Abdoma says, can we use tutoring skills as a skill one is bringing to the school community? Absolutely. To me, tutoring is a beautiful thing to be involved in, because that's saying that you're willing to invest in people who may not have all of the knowledge and resources that you have, right? So you're recognizing that, hey, you have knowledge to share with somebody else. And that's a gift that you're giving to somebody else. It shows that you care about other people as well. You're not just concerned with yourself. So to me, that is a wonderful piece of involvement that says a lot about who you are and what you will do and what you will do when you're on campus. And even more importantly, how you will treat, your fellow peers on campus and your colleagues, later on in the workforce. So I think that is a wonderful thing to focus on and make sure that AdCom knows that you're involved in. All right, well, I think we are at time, but thank you all for your engagement in the session today. I hope that you're able to, pick something, take something away. Again, this is recorded. You can go back and rewatch it, or you can find us at www.MBAExchange.com. I'd love to hear your story. Thanks, everybody.